Evans-Williams. I'm your Master of Ceremonies today. A few general announcements first. There will be no flash photography, please. It blinds the speakers. And please do take the time now to get out your phones, take that ringer, and put it on vibrate, please. As well, questions online can be posed using slido.com, SLIDO.com. Once you're in the slido.com, hashtag IPETCA, 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 and you'll be brought to the question area. You can type in your questions to the panelists. Washrooms are located on the right and around the corner when exiting the theater. There's no food or drink in the theater, please. Refreshments are located opposite the front entrance of the theater in the window. Between the first and second panels, we'll have a 10-minute break, and in this 10-minute break, it's time for a group photo of all the moderators, speakers, elders, etc., and it's also time to set up the second panel. The second panel will reconvene at 3:05 p.m. Moderators, please be mindful of your time slots. Should there be any further instructions for the moderators, I'll be getting on stage and just passing them a little sticky note. So with that, we'll start our official opening, and that will be the opening prayer by Claudette Commanda. Allow me to do a little bit of an introduction for Claudette Commanda. This is the part I really like. Claudette Commanda is the First Nations elder and knowledge keeper. She's Algonquin Anishinaabe from Kitigan-Zibi Anishinaabe First Nation. Claudette Commanda is an alumnus of the University of Ottawa's Faculty of Law of Arts. Claudette has dedicated the last 30 years to promoting First Nations people, history, culture, and rights in various capacities as a student, professor, and chair of the Aboriginal Education Council at the University of Ottawa. She's a professor at the University of Ottawa's Institute for Women's Studies, Faculty of Education, Faculty of Law, and the Aboriginal Studies program. She teaches courses on First Nations women, First Nation education, First Nations peoples and history, Indigenous traditions, and decolonization. Claudette is also the executive director of the First Nations Confederacy of Cultural Education Centers, a national organization that protects and promotes First Nation culture, languages, and traditional knowledge. She was inducted into the Common Law Honor Society, serving 2 terms on the Board of Governors for the First Nations University of Canada and 3 terms on the Kitigan-Zibi Band Council. In 2017, Claudette became the first First Nation individual appointed as Elder in Residence at the University of Ottawa's Faculty of Law and the first person of First Nation heritage to be appointed to the Board of Governors at the University of Ottawa. In March 2020, Claudette received the 2020 Inspire Award for Culture, Heritage, and Spirituality. Claudette is a proud mother of 4 children and a granddaughter to 10 children. And it's my privilege and pleasure to allow Claudette to do the opening prayer, and I will give her a gift of tobacco on behalf of the Government of Canada and all assembled. Claudette.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, brother, for those kind words and for the passing of the sacred medicine. Truly appreciate it. Chimigwech. For those of you that would like to stand as we give this blessing, you're more than welcome to stand. For those of you who would like to be seated, you're more than welcome to be seated. It is said in our way, in our traditions, that when we are in our lodges, we sit upon our mother, the earth. And the only time that we stand in prayer is when we are in the ceremonies such as the Sundance ceremony. But I welcome you to either stand or to be seated. What's important is what we will offer from our heart. We're going to offer a song of our heart to the Creator. The word that we use in the Anishinaabe Algonquin language for prayer is Emi Yawin. And what that means is to chant And we always sang our prayers. And think about it. Isn't it so beautiful when we offer a prayer, a song of our heart to the Creator and to our ancestors, to our Mother the Earth, to our grandfather the sun, our grandmother the moon, to all our relatives who lived upon this earth and now have moved on into that spirit world, and to all those beautiful spirit helpers that have always been with us since the beginning of time, and to the Creator, the one and only, the Most Highest. For His love is so plentiful, and He blesses us each and every day. And I begin by acknowledging each and every one of you beautiful people. I acknowledge Indigenous peoples from coast to coast to coast and around the world. I acknowledge leaders. I acknowledge elders. I acknowledge colleagues. I acknowledge all of you. We are in this circle at this moment. And what a most fitting place to hold this gathering. It is a circle. Isn't this beautiful? That we are gathering together in person. We're no longer in those little itty-bitty squares in Zoom or Teams, but we're now here together in person. We are in a circle. And I say to each and every one of you, Miigwej nichkiwe dogashishanishnabeg, Miigwej kibija yegoma nongum, Pijajig anishnabeki, Pijajig. For those of you in the French language, bienvenue tout le monde.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome here to the unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation, our ancestors.
One of you beautiful people, whom I call relatives, whom I call brothers and sisters, whom I call colleagues and friends. I welcome you on behalf of the Algonquin Nation, my family, my community, my nation, the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Omamawenini. I welcome each and every one of you to this beautiful, beautiful, unceded homeland of the Algonquin people. Welcome, my brothers and sisters, Indigenous peoples, from wherever your homelands are. Welcome. I feel the beauty in this circle. I feel the love that's in this circle, and I feel your ancestors. Isn't that powerful? Isn't that powerful? I acknowledge the first ancestors of this land, the ancestors of the Algonquin and the Anishinaabe people. I acknowledge the ancestors, those ancestors that I come from. I acknowledge them and I thank them. I acknowledge the ancestors of Indigenous peoples. No matter where the Indigenous peoples come from, I acknowledge your ancestors. I acknowledge everyone's ancestors, everyone who is here. It doesn't matter our color or what we believe. I acknowledge all the ancestors, and they are here, and they are powerful, and they are real. And I say, Chimi, Gwedj, Atsukawin. I acknowledge them. We must never forget where we come from. We must always remember that the ancestors are always here to guide us, to help us. And as Indigenous peoples, we always reach out to those ancestors and we call upon them because we know they have never forgotten us and that we know that they continue to pray for us no matter the difficulties that we are facing here in this physical world. We rely on their strength and their wisdom because the Creator has blessed them. But the Creator has loved us so much that He ensures that our ancestors will always be here in the same way that we must always ensure that the land will always be here. The land. We are the land, and the land is who we Nindaki. We are the land, and the land is me, or we. So important. The work that you have been doing speaks about land. It speaks about culture. It speaks about identity. It speaks about the power and the wisdom. And it speaks about life, the life for Indigenous peoples. And we have always been sharing, and we will always share. And that is a great responsibility that we have as Indigenous peoples and all peoples. You know, some people will say you don't own the land. The only thing that we own, no matter what color we are or our title we hold or what we believe in, the only thing we own is the responsibility to the land and to Mother Earth for our children today and tomorrow. So I welcome you, and I ask at this time if we can put our hearts, our spirit, and our mind together in one voice, and let's give great appreciation to the Creator, because but for the Creator we wouldn't be here, right? And I want to really thank the Minister, Mark Miller. Thank you for your respect that you have for Indigenous peoples. Chimigwej. Thank you for being here. And to other leaders, thank you for being here too as well. This is such an important day. It's an important moment because a relationship is being built, and it's going to continue because we're going to walk that road together. The knowledge and the wisdom of Indigenous peoples, they will share. So listen and learn. Our hearts, our spirit will be open. And what a great day it is today. And what a beautiful tomorrow we will make for all our children. And then our ancestors will smile down upon us because goodness is being made. And that good road we will walk. Mama we, bimose, mino, mikan. Gonna walk that good road together. Gishiminado. Gishiminado. Kichimigwe jonje nongum. Miigwech kinakego. Creator, together with one heart and one spirit and one voice, we thank you for all of your blessings. And nabagis kokamisag and nabagis mishomsag das pinigen. Nibok sendam mashkauzuin onje nongum kakina ashishwabang. Miigwech jojoaki. Miigwech kokamistapikizis, miigwech mishomiskizis. Kishiminado ni buksendam onje kakina nongom ashishwabang. Ni buksendam, ni bakawin. Ni buksendam mashkawiziwin. Ni buksendam manajitawawin. Ni buksendam zagieduin ashishminupamatsuin. Creator, as brothers and sisters, Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, we are gathered here today in this circle, and we thank you. We thank you for your love. We thank you for your blessings. We thank you for all that you have provided. We give honor and thanks to our Mother, the Earth, for all her water life, her plant life, her medicine life, the animal life, all that is above and all that is below. And we give great thanks and honor to our grandparents, our grandmother the moon and our grandfather the sun. And we thank you, Creator, for blessing us with these beautiful natural elements that we need as human beings to survive upon Mother Earth in this physical world. Creator, we acknowledge our ancestors, Nijenwendaganag. Creator, we acknowledge our relatives who have gone on into that spirit world, and we thank them for their love each and every day. Creator, we honor the children of today and the children of tomorrow and those 7 generations as we acknowledge the children who are now in that spirit world. Let them know that we love them and we will always love them. Creator, we acknowledge the beauty of life as we acknowledge the wisdom, the strength, the courage, the respect, and the truth that is always shared. And it is my prayer, Ninemi Yahweh Nonje Kakina, that you continue to loan them and bless them with good words, Chimino Tagazuin, to bless them, Creator, with wisdom, Mina Nibakawin, to bless them, Creator, with respect for self and one another, Manajitawawin, to bless them, Creator, with strength, a good life, Minapomadswin. Creator, we thank you for the love that you share with us, as we will share love with one another. So Chimigwej Gishiminado, we thank you together with that one heart, one spirit, one voice. We say Chimigwej Miigwech. Thank you. Miigwech.
Okay, it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce the opening address, which of course is our special guest, Minister Miller, Minister Mark Miller, the Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations. A little background about Minister Miller. The Honourable Mark Miller was first elected in 2015 as the Member of Parliament for Ville-Marie, le Sud-Ouest, Île-de-Sur in Montreal. He has previously served as Minister of Indigenous Services. Before entering politics, Minister Miller was a practicing lawyer. He specialized in mergers and acquisitions with a focus on international and commercial law and worked in Montreal, Stockholm, and New York City. Previously, he served as an infantry soldier for the Canadian Armed Forces. Minister Miller made history in 2017 when he delivered a statement in the House of Commons entirely in Mohawk, marking the first time the language has been spoken in either the House of Commons or Senate since Confederation. He's also been a forceful advocate for increased federal investment in affordable housing, public transit, and the Canada Child Benefit. Minister Miller has been involved in several charitable and pro bono legal activities. He has also authored articles on constitutional and human rights law. Minister Miller is a graduate of the Université de Montréal, where he earned a master's and bachelor's degree in political science. He also graduated from McGill University with degrees in common law and civil law. Minister Miller was born and raised in Montreal, and without further ado, the opening address by Minister Miller.
I think most of that was true. It has to be 100% true. Thank you for the kind words, and Chimigwech, Elder Commander, for welcoming us to your land, and the generosity with the words that you spoke, particularly when, for my part, when it's not deserved at times. It gives us courage to correct bad behavior and to move along in a good way, knowing that you're there beside us to guide us and to move where you're pointing. So I do want to thank everyone here today for being here. Kwe, ulukut, tanse, hello, et bonjour. This is not something I'm particularly used to because as I was telling Peter and Tracy earlier on, most of my work has been inward looking in the last 3 years, obviously with the pandemic looming over all our heads. There's also an opportunity, excuse me, there's also an opportunity in the next little while to start showing what we're doing as a country, good and bad. The economic aspect of a non-linear and sometimes halting road that we call reconciliation is an opportunity to reflect on that and to show how our country is moving, to really show where other countries are moving, some ahead of us, and catch up at times, or show the way to other countries where we share the responsibility, a deep and profound legal duty to the same peoples, or at times the same colonial past. I'm pleased to be joining First Nations, Inuit, and Métis representatives and leaders, along with the esteemed guests and colleagues here today. I'm honored to provide these opening remarks for the Trade and Indigenous Policy Symposium and reaffirm our endorsement, Canada's endorsement, of the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangement, which has come with a lot of work of partners involved. And I want to take a moment to lift them up because it's been done over the course of the last little while that has been immensely trying on the peoples that we're trying to lift up, or allow and have the opportunity to lift up the amazing work that they are doing. As the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, I'm pleased to provide, and this should go without saying, my full support and endorsement for IPETCA. This is about supporting economic development and building prosperity, integrating Indigenous communities and leaders in its design and implementations, and at times in the role like mine, stepping out of the way and letting those people lead. It shows that international trade can go and must go hand in hand with the respect for inherent rights and worldviews, including the protection of lands, as Elder Commanda mentioned, waters, and natural resources. Indigenous peoples in all parts of the world are not strangers to trade. They've been part of trade networks, immensely sophisticated trade networks since time immemorial, ones that still confound the so-called scientists. But that trade is fundamental to Indigenous history, identity, and economic well-being. The arrangement recognizes this fact and demonstrates that trade, environmental stewardship, and honoring the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples can coexist and must coexist. It is truly a model for all countries striving to achieve equity while protecting the environment and mitigating the impacts of looming climate change. By integrating Indigenous rights-based concepts and worldviews, the arrangement takes on a much deeper meaning than trade transactions. It's not just about profit. It's about supporting social and environmental well-being in the long term. And concepts that are not antithetical to this, but central to Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and that we can all learn from. Indigenous ideals and worldviews like sustainability, reciprocity, care, respect, and environmental stewardship are woven directly into the fabric of the agreement, aligning it closely with the United Nations declarations on the rights of Indigenous peoples. Endorsing IPETCA is a natural step and an important one in reaffirming Canada's commitment to implement the UN Declaration. On June 21st, exactly a year and a day ago, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act received royal assent and came into force in Canada. IPETCA, developed in close collaboration with Indigenous partners, underscores and acknowledges the importance of the United Nations Declaration and self-determination at the core of it with regards to the rights to maintain and develop economic systems and institutions and to engage freely in all their traditional and other economic activities. This discussion is not complete and can't be complete without a profound reflection on land, as Elder Commanda underscored. It's something that we are engaged as a government and are on a very incomplete path there at this time. This arrangement is an example of how our government and Indigenous peoples can work together and implement the Declaration in the spirit of reconciliation, recognition of rights, and cooperative relations. And I do want to take this last moment to recognize New Zealand as the leader of this historic agreement. This is an excellent opportunity to recognize that the success of IPETCA is as a result of a meaningful and mutually respectful partnership between governments and Indigenous representatives. And just before we endorsed the arrangement, I had the pleasure, it feels like ages ago, but only a short while ago, of meeting Minister Mahuta when she visited Canada last November. We addressed the vital role of Indigenous peoples in economic success and sustainability in both our countries. And international collaboration is an absolute necessity to achieve our shared economic, social, and environmental goals. It's hard to conclude these remarks with saying we need to integrate more countries into this because they are key to the success of it. And as we endorse IPETCA, I look forward to collaborating with the leaders that are here today as you determine how best to address your community's needs. And I really can think no way better to mark National Indigenous History Month and the day after National Indigenous Peoples Day than by being here and speaking to you. I look forward to this the vibrant conversation with the panel, as well as the results that will certainly be yielded over the next 12 months and years to come. Miigwech, Kuyanamik, Marcy Cho, thank you, merci.
Okay, thank you, Minister Miller. Okay, let's get into this. I have a small little opening remark here before I introduce the panels. My name, of course, is Wayne Garnons-Williams. I'm Plains Cree, Treaty 6 Moosomin First Nation. I'm the chair of the International Intertribal Trade and Investment Organization and CEO of the Indigenous Sovereign Trading Consultancy Limited. In 2017, as a result of the NAFTA negotiations, I became one of the founding members of the Global Affairs Indigenous Working Group with Michael Woods, and we started this little band of groups with respect to the indigenous trade to culminate in this. And in 2021, I was the lead Indigenous representative for Canada in the negotiations. Today, I am your master of ceremonies for this Indigenous Trade Symposium hosted by the Government of Canada here in the Museum of History in Gatineau, Quebec. Today, we have two panels, a business panel and a policy panel. And I will be introducing you to the moderators of each of the panels shortly. But first, it's my honor and duty to set the context and tell you a little bit about the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangement, which I'll be referring to as IPETCA from now on. So what is IPETCA? IPETCA is the first modern comprehensive international Indigenous trade arrangement. It's like an MOU. It's voluntary, it's flexible, and it's cooperation-based. It's a revolutionary instrument for not only its content and philosophy, but also for the international Indigenous inclusiveness in its negotiations, implementation, and governance. Importantly, as the minister has said, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples informed and inspired a great deal of the text of IPETCA. So what makes IPETCA different, historic, and groundbreaking? Well, the key here is inclusiveness and partnership. The New Zealand government, in cooperation with the Maori trade organization Te Tomata, took the unique opportunity while New Zealand was in the 2021 APEC hosting duties to lead on the development of the first modern Indigenous-centered international trade negotiation. And the four governments that became involved were New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and Chinese Taipei. They collaborated with, each of those governments collaborated with their respective Indigenous peoples from their own countries during the preparation and negotiation phases. In Canada, the Indigenous Working Group, made up of various Indigenous organizations and government departments, proceeded on a consensus through dialogue and collaboration to reach agreement on Canada's position going forward to the negotiations. Never happened before. During IPETCA, the government-to-government negotiations, it became necessary for the development of a subgroup of Indigenous contributors from the four negotiating countries to form. And so it formed the International Indigenous IPETCA Committee to have frank and free discussion of Indigenous trade issues outside the formal nation-to-nation or government-to-government process, but also alongside it to help iron out the areas that needed clarification for the formal negotiations to succeed. Due to good planning and aggressive consensus building by the International Indigenous IPETCA Committee and government negotiators, the IPETCA was finalized within 1 year. Indigenous people will play a significant part in the day-to-day operations of IPETCA through both the IPETCA Partnership Council and the informal APEC Caucus on Indigenous Trade and Investment. These administrative bodies will be the key to bringing the arrangement to life. Today, you will hear from both business and policy panels about some of the highlights of IPETCA, the definition of Indigenous trade, which has never been done before, the environmental aspects of this arrangement, the Indigenous worldview incorporated into the agreement, and the 22 potential Indigenous trade and business areas of economic trade and cooperation. So, with that groundwork set, I will now, it's my pleasure to introduce the first moderator for the business panel. And the moderator is Dawn Madabi-Leach. She is Anishinabek and a member of the Andek Omni Kanig First Nation. Ms. Madabi-Leach is the chairperson of the National Indigenous Economic Development Board, a Governor and Council appointed board mandated to provide strategic counsel and program advice to the federal government on Indigenous economic development. She has been the general manager for Wabatek Business Development Corporation since 1988. Wabatek is a leading Indigenous financial institution that provides financial services to Indigenous entrepreneurs and 27 First Nation communities in Northeast Ontario. She's been the advisor on for the Canadian negotiating team on the IPETCA negotiations as well. So without further ado, but I just want to mention, if you have questions, don't forget, you at home or you in the audience, you can go to slido.com, SLIDO.com, and then type in the search hashtag IPETCA, IPETCA, and then you can pose questions to the moderator. So without further ado, Dawn.
Miigwechwain, Ani Kiniwea, Bonjour, Bidab Indigenous Cause, Jijak Dodem, Nadom Nasing Donjaba. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here and to have participated in the opening of this special day. And I want to thank my dear friend Claudette Commanda for the beautiful opening prayer. Her words always touch the heart and are so relevant and meaningful to whatever occasion. You know, this is really important. I hope that everyone takes to heart the beautiful words that she just shared with us. And thank you to the minister as well for being here. And he's been at a few events supporting Indigenous economic development, and I really appreciate that, Minister Miller, to see you here. And I witnessed him launching, actually speaking on the year of the Indigenous languages at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. He spoke in Mohawk there as well and gave the opening remarks. It's very, very impressive. So it shows that anyone, I think, can learn the language if they put their mind and heart to it. So Chimigwech for all of that effort and for your great support of these kinds of events for our people. So I'm honored to be here on the traditional territories as well of the Algonquin peoples, and it's so meaningful to be here. And when I come here, I always visualize how our people lived. I can see that still every time I come to this beautiful part of this country. In my mind, I see how our people lived here, and you can see why with the beautiful rivers and waterways here. It was a strategic area for trade, international trade, really. When you think of it now, those boundaries weren't there for our people, but we always traded. And I know that there's a lot of archaeological evidence about the fact that we traded with our brothers and sisters in South America, Central America, and of course the US and across everyone talks about the Bering Strait theory, that there was evidence of people crossing. Of course there was, because we were trading all the time with the peoples there. It wasn't just a one-way path. And so it always boggles my mind when people think it's just a theory of our people crossing over. So yes, we were involved in trade. That's how our system of economic development worked, and we still do in many ways. So to me, it's a real honor to be here today to celebrate this momentous occasion on the development of the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangement. I'm so honored to be part of a process where we had our Indigenous brothers and sisters from New Zealand and Australia, Chinese Taipei, and Canada work together very hard on developing this type of a cooperation arrangement. There's a lot that we learned about international trade in this process. And so I think it really helped to build our capacity and knowledge in this area in terms of today's modern agreements. I am proud to have been working on the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Committee for this purpose, and to let you know that we also work on other trade agreements as well. And so there's a lot of ongoing work taking place and ongoing capacity building, not just on our side, but on the government side too, because they're all learning about our peoples, and it's fun actually to share with each other and to help build that capacity within global affairs. And I think that's really, you know, we've never had this opportunity before to be involved in the negotiation of free trade agreements. It's been wonderful to have our voices involved. This is unprecedented. So we really appreciate the people we get to work with, like Georgina here. She's been amazing support, and all of the team there at Global Affairs. So I just want to say thank you for this, and I just love the work that we get to do. So we know that this signing is taking place about 2.5 weeks after the launch of the National Indigenous Economic Strategy for Canada that took place on June 6th here in Ottawa. And it's been such a positive initiative that involved I think it was just over 25 national Indigenous economic organizations that came together over the past 2 years during COVID to develop a strategy for Canada. Oftentimes in the past, these strategies were developed by government. This is the first time that we said, no, we're going to hold a pen. and develop the strategy so we can better communicate what our needs are. And that type of a process is, again, historical too, very unprecedented. And I want to say that it's also showed the strength of collaboration as our Indigenous organizations work together on this. So because of that, we're going to continue a lot of work together. And of course, the implementation of the strategies is going to be an important piece going forward, because the strategy itself is a roadmap to economic reconciliation in Canada. So it's a guide, if people are looking for a guide or a roadmap to economic reconciliation in Canada. It's based on 4 strategic directions of people, lands, infrastructure, and finance. And there are 107 calls to economic prosperity in that document. You can find it at niestrategy.ca. if you're looking for electronic copy. There's actually a section in there, and I brought a copy of it here today. I carry this with me everywhere. See what it looks like. And the calls to, there's a section on trade that talks about establishing mechanisms to recognize Indigenous free trade zones as defined and regulated by Indigenous peoples. It talks about creating an Indigenous Export Development Corporation. A lot of the recommendations here are about Indigenous-led institutions. It talks about implementation of the Jay Treaty, as well as establishing Indigenous trade agreements and networks nationally and internationally. It also talks about all free trade agreements, including chapters on Indigenous peoples and trade, co-developed with Indigenous peoples. So those are really important calls to economic prosperity that's listed there. So I encourage you in whatever way, in whatever capacity you have, because this strategy and this roadmap is meant for all Canadians, including all levels of government, all institutions, whether it be health, justice, academia. It's there for all small businesses as well, and corporate Canada, and all of our people. Sometimes it's better for us to take action rather than waiting for somebody else to do it. That's one of the things I've learned over the years. So I just want to say, please check that out. So for today, it's really my pleasure to introduce our panelists. You'll see that we originally had 3 people, but modern times, COVID affects people sometimes, and so our 3rd panelist came down with COVID. So we're down to 2 very, very capable individuals who'll be able to share a lot about their businesses, and I've had the extreme pleasure of working with both of them over the years. So I'm really proud of the work that they both do, and it just so happens that I happen to be able to moderate them, so to me it's a real privilege today to be here. So I'm going to introduce both of them, but I'm going to start with Natalie Desome. She's the founder and CEO of Poppies and Peonies. So Poppies and Peonies is a fast-growing online fashion brand. Growing up in Penetanguishene in Ontario, Natalie had big dreams. Those dreams brought her all over the globe, designing for brands like Banana Republic, Fossil, Abercrombie, and Aldo. Her quest for functional style was born when she became a mom to her daughter, Poppy. Poppy and Peonies designs have been featured on Dragon's Den, Toronto Star, City Line, and The Social. So, Natalie, if you could share a few words about yourself with the group here today.
Yes, Miigwech Don. Hi, everyone. It is an honor to be here. Like Don said, my name is Natalie Desome, and I come from the community the Métis community in Penetanguishene, Ontario. And essentially, I am an entrepreneur, and I started a business called Poppy and Peonies. And I started this business right from my basement. And I got really the idea from my business when my daughter Poppy was born, like Dawn mentioned. At the time, I was a new mom and I was looking for functional fashion and I couldn't find it. So I decided to take my design background along with my experience and make my dream come true. And it has been such a journey growing Poppy and Peonies. Oh my gosh, where do I start? It has really grown, and I think it's grown thanks to the support of our community, my family, Wabatech, the MNO, the Women's Fund, BDC. We've really grown it into something extraordinary. So to put it into perspective, last year we sold approximately 50,000 handbags all across Canada. So that's a lot of bags, right? Yes, I know. Part of that, you know, being a mom and being an Indigenous entrepreneur means that I have a purpose far beyond profit, and that is impact. So I know that I have the resilience and I have the strength to overcome any challenge that comes my way, thanks to the 7 generations of strong Indigenous women behind me. And it's very important that I can, I'm so sorry, as you can tell, I'm very nervous. We haven't spoken at an event in over 2 years, so please forgive me. But what's really important to me is I have a duty and a responsibility to my daughter and to the 7 generations of leaders and of the future ahead of me to operate my business in a sustainable way and to put our planet and the health of the animals that live on our planet first. So that is very important, and it's important that we grow all of our businesses in a sustainable way. So I wanted to share a little story of something that happened last week that relates to this from a small business perspective. So we operate our platform on a website you probably know called Shopify. And what's interesting about Shopify is that you can see where your visitors are coming from all over the world. So it actually shows you a map, a globe, and you can see little lights of where everyone is coming from. And so we were gearing up to launch a product. We got our customers excited about it. They were ready to go. And our customers know that they should tune in at noon when we launch, or else our product sells out. So we launch our product and we are looking at this live view and we can see, you know, all across Canada is lit up. All over the US is lit up. And then I started to turn the globe and I could see we had clusters of lights all over Australia, all over New Zealand. We had visitors coming from Japan, Indonesia, Sri Lanka. We had Finland and the UK, and I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. I had no idea that our small business from Penetanguishene, Ontario could grow to a global audience. And I was very excited, but the more I thought about it, I started to get a little disappointed. And I was disappointed because I just felt like we didn't have the resources to access those markets or grow in those markets. And it just felt like a missed opportunity to me. So this is why I am so excited to be here, and this is why I'm so excited about IPETCA, not only for what it could mean for my business and opportunity, but what it could mean for my daughter and for future generations of Indigenous female entrepreneurs. So thank you.
Oh, beautiful. That was wonderful, Natalie. So my next panelist here is my good friend Bradley Young, who's an Opaskwayak Cree from the end of the North Saskatchewan River in present-day northern Manitoba. He's a graduate from programs at the University of British Columbia, University of Alberta, University of Victoria, where he holds a master's degree in Indigenous governance. He's partially finished with a doctorate in Indigenous governance, exploring Indigenous rights and development. He's played a key and active role in advising the Canadian negotiating team throughout the IPETCA negotiations. So he's the executive director of the National Aboriginal Forestry Association. So it's my pleasure as well to introduce my friend Bradley, and your introduction, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Madam Moderator. Nanaskum Tanawao, Nawagu Magan, Tikagmanin, Tota Makbetag, Kitasipi Aski, our host, Nanaskum Tan Cladet, Agwana Gagano, Gimusumak, Agwana Kukumwak, Agwana Gagano, Ogwe Honwe, Ininwak, Anishinabek, Emustugusiwak, Muniazak. Chief Clarence liked that one. Our visitors from the other lands, Dawao, welcome to Turtle Island. Thank you for the introduction, Don. A bit of our language there, Bradley Young, Itisigasun, Bradley Young, Indigenous, in Anishinaabe Muin.
Oh, wow.
These are good words to speak of welcome, to remind us of the connections to each other on Turtle Island. When I think about Ottawa, when I think about this building that we're being hosted in, built by a Blackfoot Métis man, Douglas Cardinal, a national treasure, hosted by the Algonquin Nation even back then, connecting with late William Commanda, the vision of, hey, the Indigenous peoples, we need to have a national building to bring together, to consolidate the Canadian project under Trudeau 1. And that vision of the Canadian emerging in the north, in North America, while we have a shining star, I would say, despite recent drama, to the south, where the Iroquois Haudenosaunee maiden of democracy, of representative voice, of collaboration, sits on top of the national capital. That is not a Greek golden boy down in the US Capitol. That is a Haudenosaunee Iroquois woman of peace and of democracy, of debate, reasonable contention. And to the north, the Indigenous confederacies were a part of this great tradition of sharing. And that, of course, is the backdrop, the context, the backdrop of trade. It begins with good words. It begins with our peoples. It begins with us visiting and collaborating, joining together, visiting different lands. And this land here was known right across Turtle Island through our great trails, Mikanak Aski, Turtle Island, Meskenak Wikask, Nipimutan, Gagano Gitdeag. The old people used to travel across the trails, across Turtle Island, and gather. For one thing, our young people could not marry their cousins. You had to gather every season so our families could collaborate, our confederacies could come together in a time of peace, in a time of bounty, and could exchange. And yes, there was economic trading that happened. And this great river here used to be, and is still represented in our minds by the great pipe stem. There was an island there prior to things being modified on the land base, where the water would go over the falls here. And the rock and the falls, there was a pipe bowl, and that jet of water and mist coming up in the middle of the Ottawa River was a call to come to the Ottawa River Valley, come in peace, come in trade, come and gather. That's what Ottawa represents to the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. It is within my family's traditional territory and stories that we've had visitors here, even though I am from the north end of the continent, the north central end of the continent, at the end of the North Saskatchewan. We use these waterways to exchange. And you only exchange if you have a diplomatic ability and a politics that allows you to exchange, because as you know, if there is conflict, if there is friction, economic relations don't exactly prosper in that type of environment. And the fact that there were these trade networks here on Turtle Island from time immemorial tells us that, overall, this vision of democracy, of organic contention, of debate, that the Indigenous peoples mixed together with the Gichimugaman Aski Emistugusiwak, the Americans in our language, and then the Canadians, and we've blended it together, and we've looked over at Australia, we've looked over at New Zealand with the Maori, we've looked over at Chinese Taipei and the economic trade agreement, and we've brought that vision, and we've looked at what they did there, really, and said, in Canada, I think we can meet that challenge. We can use our history, we can use our values, and we can bring our trading agreements and our arrangements with Indigenous peoples into the modern world and the modern context, because entrepreneurs like Natalie, these are some of my personal heroes. The entrepreneurial drive to take capital, to take time, to risk putting together a business enterprise, and then to develop into markets. There is a profound entrepreneurial drive there that I think is very special. And we have that across many of our Indigenous confederacies across this land and individuals. And with the technology and with the dispersion of manufacturing and business intelligence that's happening right across our economies, this is when I believe that we'll be seeing the Indigenous business groups of yesterday and of today really emerging and going into new markets. In the crowd today, we have some of the largest Indigenous manufacturers and traders in the world here. We have a group here in the crowd, the Meadow Lake Tribal Council Industrial Investments Group. This is a vertically consolidating and horizontally consolidating industrial group, 100% owned by Indigenous peoples, 100% managed and guided by an Indigenous tribal council, the Meadow Lake Tribal Council. Get this, 4 Dene nations, 5 Cree nations together in one tribal council. And they've held it together for over 30 years. This group, of course, took the ancestral struggles along with the other Indigenous forest sector dreamers around the time of the repatriation of Canada's Constitution in the early 80s. And they took commercial participation in our domestic forestry markets from almost 0% of tenure held to now Indigenous peoples hold over 19.4 million cubic meters of actual forest modern day commercial tenure. You translate that out to a land base, about 25,000 square kilometers, about the size of the country of Ireland, I believe. So these are substantial commercial holdings that have been accreted through politics, through diplomatics, through lawsuits, through contention. And these groups that have done this in Canada have now stand on the precipice of attracting additional capital into the provincial regions where they're located, adding an additional $5.1 billion of GDP into the economy, on top of an existing base of 15,000 full-time jobs. And you think about the poverty in Indigenous communities and what one of those full-time union jobs are largely, industrial jobs, what that means to a family, what that means to the children in these homes that are working in these Indigenous forest sector business units, where the children are fed, they're housed, they're going to school ready to learn. And you think about these young people will really take IPETCA, I believe. And they will take it and they will go into the markets of the world. Now, it's not all a rosy picture. because we have, and this is important, you know, we're not bringing in our guests into a family argument here, but I think it's a principled way of saying, and we do a lot of things wrong in Canada. To our Australian, New Zealand, you know, our world audience, we do not do everything right here in Canada. And in fact, if you just use forestry, in some provinces, there is zero participation of Indigenous peoples in a province in forestry. Zero, a goose egg. And yet in other provinces, you have upwards of 50% of the tenure being held. You have actual manufacturing facilities attracting hundreds of millions of dollars of capital investment, jobs being created. And where are they trading? Predominantly we trade, yes, in the US. We have a trade irritant discussion with the US. This is why these agreements are important. When you trade, sometimes you have a disagreement or two. You have other regions that are a blend, 5%, 10%, 30%. But the principle is set. When you have Indigenous peoples in control of a land base, when you have them with equity and control over the economic ecosystem, you have stability. And an interesting thing that happens, according to Natalie and Claudette, Don, all the Indigenous speakers, it's not a free-for-all. Indigenous peoples, when they gain stewardship over a natural resource or a territory, and it holds all over the world. When we were hosted in New Zealand by the Lake Taupo Forest Trust in about 10 years ago, they had a remarkably similar sentiment amongst the Maori. They said, we take about half of that forest base and we want to use it. The other half, we set aside and we protect for the ones that can't speak. Of the half that we're going to use, we don't use it all right away. We think about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 generations into the future, the eternity of time that our people will exist on our land. That's where we want to build a livelihood and economy and we want to trade from. And so it's agreements like IPETCA that have environmental provisions, that have responsible business conduct traditions with other economies, that have gender principles in there, that have union organized labor principles in there. These are the things that are in these agreements that we are negotiating, that we debate over internally. And at the same time in Canada, we're debating internally how to do this as well. I encourage our visitors and I encourage Canadians, provincially, nationally, regionally, internationally, our friends, to have those debates. Make things better, make things more open, and try things out. We have a lot of unfinished business in Canada. There are some things there administratively and governmentally that I think we can do better. And I think this is why we're gathered here today to discuss this. And I'm just so pleased to be talking to a group of humans, and I love my family, but that is not just my family.
Thank you so much, Bradley. You know what? You're going to school on these two panelists today, and they're just amazing individuals who have a lot to share. You know, today's work session doesn't have enough time, but I'm going to ask a question now of Natalie, but thank you so much, Bradley. What a great education here that we've been able to receive from you today. So thank you so much for that. So I'm going to just ask Natalie here. I have one question, and I don't have too much before we open it up, I think, to the audience, right? And so I haven't had a chance to go through some of this, but we want to ask you, Natalie, how important is trade to Indigenous peoples in Canada and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's integral to our culture, our history, and it is essential. So what excites me is that in today's modern world, we have access to social media. So we can connect with so many communities on so many levels. And that's really exciting and fresh and new. So, yeah.
Thank you. And the same question for you, Brad.
What was the question?
Okay.
I'm sorry, Don.
Yeah.
Where
Well,
are
I
we?
kind of think you touched on this already. You talked about how important trade is to Indigenous peoples in Canada and beyond. What do you think are the, maybe I'll give you a different question here. What are the biggest challenges that you or the businesses in the forestry industry face when seeking to engage in trade? Are there specific challenges?
I'll answer both of them. So very important for trade, to develop new markets for existing businesses, to go out and to exchange with other human beings in the human family. Very important. Of course, there's crass economics involved in it, that you need growing markets and you need a business to grow for it to be a thriving going concern in the language of an accountant. In terms of opening up a market, there's some principles there. And I think in Natalie's case and other entrepreneurs' case, I think there is a newness to business that I think is commendable. But there's also some structural realities there where a lot of Indigenous businesses don't have 1 and 2 and 3 generations of retained earnings in their business capital. They are startups. They are 1 or 2 generations in. The Indigenous groups that are more in place, have been in place for a number of years, they have a dual mandate oftentimes, that because they'll be owned by Indigenous governments, and these Indigenous governments have a duty to their shareholders, which are their Indigenous nation communities, to take those retained earnings that come out of good business and to invest them into the social good, the community fabric in their communities.
Thank you, Brad. I'm going to, just on that, I remember Natalie talking about the difficulty for access to capital to expand into new markets.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely. So as an entrepreneur, it is incredibly difficult to get access to capital to grow your business. And luckily, we have, Wabitec, and we have M&O, and we have a lot of services available to us, but we can really only grow at the level that we can profit. So it is very difficult to grow, and as a small business, we have even more challenges nowadays with our supply chain issues. So what we're finding is we have supply chain issues all across, from labor shortages to hydro shortages to our shipping containers. Shipping a container has doubled in price. We have, once our goods get to the port, they sit there, for probably 4 to 5 weeks because of port congestion. So we miss key deliveries with our customers. We miss key deliveries for other clients, like our wholesale partners. And, there's so many factors that can happen along the way. Like we had one of our goods were on a ship that was on the coast of Victoria that caught fire and had a storm that lost 140 containers. So we didn't find out for 4 months if our goods were even going to make it on the container. So we had to absorb that cost for many months. From natural disasters to landslides and fires going across the rails. Like, we cannot get our goods fast enough. And not only that, but they are extremely inflated because all of the raw materials and labor cost increase. So what we're finding is we're having to air in our goods, and that is cutting our margin by probably over 30%, leaving us with even less operating capital. So it's even more difficult to grow into another market because we just don't have the capital to do so. So that is why having those services is important, and definitely going to the bank as a startup, fast-growing company just is not really an option, So I think more financial services are important.
I can't believe it, but our session is done here.
Already
Already the time has come to an end, and we had so many more things to ask. And so I would encourage you, as you see both Natalie and Bradley circulating around during the break here, please stop and ask them any questions, because this is actually, we could go on and on. There's so much to learn from both of them. So I want to thank them both very much for being here today. Please join me in thanking them. And thank you, Wayne, again for the kind introduction and for emceeing our session.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
We'll take a 10-minute break. It'll be a short 10 minutes, and I would ask now for, it's time for a group photo on stage. I'd ask for all the don't forget, for people who have questions online, go to slido.com, slido.com, and then enter hashtag IPETCA, I-P-E-T-C-A, I-P-E-T-C-A, and then post your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce very briefly Christopher Duchesne, Director General, Economic Policy and Development, Lands and Economic Development, Indigenous Services Canada. 30 years of experience working in Indigenous and Arctic issues, including several years working for the Government of the Northwest Territories and the Government of Canada in Yellowknife before transferring to the National Capital Region to work on Indigenous services. He's worked with Inuit and First Nation communities, organizations, governments from coast to coast to coast, as well as with several Indigenous groups internationally. That's the brief one. If you want the full one, I'll be happy to give it at a later date. But Mr. Duchesne, it's all yours.
Okay. Thank you. Could you say that faster next time, please? Pleasure to be here. Merci beaucoup. Un grand plaisir d'être ici cet après-midi.
It's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon.
People face to face. Thank you very much, Elder Commanda, and it's a privilege to be on unceded Algonquin territory here. And it was a privilege to hear Minister Miller, our former minister. I'm with Indigenous Services Canada. Minister Miller, of course, is the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations. In the few years that I've been working on economic development for Indigenous Services Canada, the whole issue of trade has exploded. It has gone from it barely being a dialogue 6 or 7 years ago to being front and center now. So today's panel is going to have an opportunity to give their perspectives on trade, but also to talk about some of the policy issues and the levers required to get businesses from where they are to where they would like to be on the Indigenous businesses on the trading stage globally. So I'll quickly present the panelists and then turn it over to them. So first, to my immediate left, Sarah Wilshaw, Trade Commissioner of Canada and Assistant Deputy Minister of International Business Development, a senior government executive with 28 years experience. She leads a global team that helps Canadian businesses explore international markets, find new customers and partners, problem solve and promote growth through export. She also leads work across global trade support services, including export finance, foreign investment, recruitment of international students, and responsible business conduct. And
you can leave it there.
okay, and I was going to say we have a longer bio, but I will turn it over to Sarah for some introductory remarks, and then I'll introduce the other panelists afterwards.
Oh,
thanks.
Thank you very much. I hope folks can hear me. Thanks, Christopher. It's great to be here with you. Merci beaucoup. Je suis absolument ravie.
Thank you. I'm absolutely happy and pleased to be here with you today.
I want to say just a quick word to my friend Wayne, too, Master of Ceremonies, but also a bit of the mastermind behind all of this. You know, I think we had our first conversation about Indigenous trade when I was the Consul General in Dallas, Texas, covering a 5-state territory that also included Oklahoma, which is 10% Indigenous, and they have tremendous and wonderful businesses there that are thriving and growing. And he referenced the organization that he belongs to, ITEO for short, but the International Intertribal Trade and Investment Organization. Did I get that right? Awesome. And he introduced me to that organization and to all of what was going on between Canada and Oklahoma and tribes there. And I just, I just embraced all of that discussion. I think we had such a great time developing those relationships, and that was starting in 2014. So it's been a long road, Wayne, but this is exciting and really great to see. So thank you for that. Thank you also to Dawn. I want to say a special shout out to her as well for her leadership. And it's so funny, you brought your copy. I brought mine. I'm really excited about this National Indigenous Economic Strategy. My team and I are digging into the trade chapter. We want to have a really close look at what we can be doing better all the time. That's really what we do. And I'll talk a little bit about my team very briefly. But before I do, I also want to say thank you to the elders and to the Indigenous businesses in the room and online who are helping us to guide us, to help us to develop programs and services that help to grow businesses and to grow their opportunities internationally. And that's really important to us. We're absolutely committed in the Trade Commissioner Service to doing as much as we can to help Indigenous businesses to grow internationally. So when I think about Natalie and she's trying to figure out her way around the world and surprised that her products and services are so popular, I think, call the Trade Commissioner service, please. So I went straight up to her and said, that's exactly who she needs to talk to. We've got people, 1,500 people in 160 locations all across Canada and around the world. And we're there for you to help you grow your business, to help you succeed, to help you overcome barriers, you know, to work with local governments, to work with local partners, research, investment, innovation, all kinds of things that we can help with. We organize trade missions, we organize participation at trade fairs, we do all kinds of different things, and we have lots of programs and services. We have a technology accelerator programs, we have Can Export, which gives modest but sometimes significant funding to folks who are looking to explore new markets. So we've got a lot of different programs that will help move things forward. But one thing that's really important to us, and I'll end on this because I want to allow lots of time for others and for questions. But we started work a few years ago, back in 2019, with our Chief Economist's office and some great Indigenous business organizations here in Canada to help us to get better data about the Indigenous businesses out there in Canada, to get a sort of a handle on the landscape, so that we knew who was out there, what kinds of businesses they're operating, and you know, how we can help them, what their needs are. You heard some of those needs on the last panel, some of the challenges that folks are facing, and so I think, you know, those are sort of the things we heard. But one thing I wanted to say in particular, we started off the report of that study with a quote from the Métis historian, Dr. David McNabb, and what he said was, "Trade is the art and the science of trading has always been a significant legacy bequeathed by Indigenous people." So, and I think given the significance of international trade to a country like ours, that legacy is a very generous gift indeed, and it is one that we can and should continue learning from, just like we want to continue learning from our partners in trade as well around the world. So I'm really excited to be up here with these panelists and to have a chance to share and learn from them.
Thank you very much. I will now proceed further to the left and introduce Jiping Ye, or also known as Tilo, who's the president of Shuangli Shuangshui Enterprise Corporation and is the overseas director of Full Holidays International Travel Corporation and the president of Shuangli Shuangshui Enterprise Corporation. He attended Oklahoma City University for mass communications and business leadership and management. As a proud Aboriginal resident of Taiwan, Mr. Ye enjoys acting as a bridge to communicate with other Aboriginal-owned businesses, as well as sharing his strong Canadian business experience. He hopes to bring a commercialized business model and establish a local brand in Shizi Township, Pingtung County, his hometown. Over to you.
All right.
Thank you.
Director General Christopher Duchenis for the Indigenous Service Canada. Delegates participating on behalf of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and all our colleagues here today, and our Indigenous friends from Canada. Good afternoon. Nasuri Vasmun, Dian is Baiwan Aan, Di Gio Gujangyang. Dian Maash Taiwan, Akatsalishian. First of all, I'm honored to be taking part in this meeting on behalf of Taiwan. We have a population of 23 million people in Taiwan, with approximately 600,000 indigenous accounting for 2.4% of the total population. We have 16 officially recognized indigenous peoples, each with our own language and cultures. In Taiwan, the indigenous industry is an important channel that connects indigenous communities with traditional cultures and form a pattern of industry development unique to indigenous people. The Council of Indigenous People is a central competent authority facilitating indigenous affairs in Taiwan, overseeing the development of indigenous people, language and culture, social welfare, land and infrastructures, economy, trade, and industry. IPETCA is the first international multilateral cooperation arrangement that features indigenous perspective and values and shares the same ideas and visions of CIP regarding development strategies in economy and industry. Meeting with the delegates of the founding members today and engaging in conversation is an important first step for IPETCA. Our ancestors have historically demonstrated strong resilience and applied traditional wisdom to the changes in society through participating in economy and trading activity of every period. Under the umbrella of IPETCA, I look forward to indigenous people in Taiwan being able to make use of traditional wisdom, continue befriending indigenous people from all around the world, and in collaboration with our members, contributes to the inclusive progress and empowerment of the regional economy. Thank you. Masalu Janumun Mapuya. Uya inisnayan nangamun natsumas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ye. It's my pleasure to introduce Tracy Hupapa, the chair of the Federation of Maori Authorities. She's an award-winning company director and a recognized industry leader. She's the chair of the Federation of Maori Authorities, an organization that was established to foster and advance the economic interests of Maori authorities. She's a professional director and trusted advisor to Maori government, public and private sector entities on strategic economic development. She's on the New Zealand Trade and Investment Board of Directors, which sets strategy and monitors performance. She has won the Westpac Fairfax Media Woman of Influence Board and Management Award and has been named one of the listeners' top 10 influencers in New Zealand on Westpac Bank's New Zealand Women's Power Brokers list, and among the BBC's 100 most influential women in the world. In her spare time, Ms. Hupapa enjoys running and can often be found at the sidelines on sporting fields as a founding chair of Women in Rugby of New Zealand. Thank you, welcome. Peter will say a few words.
E tamate ua e tamate ua e tamate maroro. Kei roto I taku ringa, te upoko o te kauau tātaki tihei mauri ora. E tūana ki te mihi kia Claudette I te tuatahi. Mo tōna karakia me tana mihi kia mātou ko tau mai Aotearoa. Nā reira e Claudette, aha koa ko haere ke koe, tēnā koe, e ngā iwi take o kanata, tēnā koutou, e ngā iwi o te ao, tēnā no tātou. Christopher, Wayne, thank you for being so patient with us in breaking the flow. Our protocols back in Aotearoa, New Zealand, dictate that we need to respond to Claudette in her warm words of welcome. So thank you for allowing me to proceed, Tracy. And after Tracy has spoken, we will also sing her a waiata, a song of embellishment. So with these few words and allowing us to respond, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou.
Thank you very much, Peter. I will now turn it over to Tracy.
Tēnā tātou katoa. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon, and thank you for your very warm welcome, and thank you to Peter for your acknowledgement. I had the honour, along with Peter and also with my colleague Thomas Hayden, to co-chair the IPETCA process when New Zealand hosted APEC last year. Wayne will attest to the fact that it was a whole lot of work in a really short time by Indigenous leaders like ourselves and Tilo and others who were committed and dedicated to ensuring that we achieved this initiative while Aotearoa held the chair, because it was important for Indigenous, First Nations, and in Canada's case, Métis, to be at the table and to launch this world-first economic trade cooperation arrangement for APEC economies. And if I might, we can stretch that to the world, can't we, Wayne? One of the things that is very important, and I want to keep my kōrero very short so that we have time for engagement and conversation and queries. The beautiful and strategic concept of IPETCA is that this is Indigenous-led, co-chaired with government. This is the first time a partnership arrangement between government and Indigenous and First Nations people has been used as a platform for trade and economic development, where what is important for our people is the basis for strong economy and strong economic development. And so let me acknowledge Canada as a signatory economy alongside of Chinese Taipei, Taiwan, and I acknowledge you all, and Australia for stepping up to the mark with courage and bravery to be part of this first stage in the discussion and giving life to IPETCA. What are we going to be doing over the next 12 months? Well, we're going to be working pretty hard to establish the Partnership Council that Wayne talked about in his opening address, and also for us to start looking at a work program where we might implement that program of work in our respective economies while also supporting one another. Is this a big ask? Yeah. Is it the right time? Absolutely. Will it require us to be courageous and brave and open and honest and lead with authenticity? Definitely. During our time when we were in negotiations, and remember this was COVID crazy time, and the only way we were able to engage, and our natural inclination, wasn't it, Thomas, to be in person so we could see one another, was online. And so I just want to acknowledge, congratulate and thank the Indigenous leaders who were part of those negotiations last year. IPETCA was and is hard fought, well won, and important for the 7 generations to come, and acknowledge of the 7 generations that brought us here. I'm looking forward to having an in-depth or engaged discussion during time. So please, for those of you who are a little uncomfortable about Slido, I just literally downloaded it in 30 seconds and put up some questions. So feel free to engage in that way. But again, I want to acknowledge Pita, my co-chair, and Thomas, my other co-chair, and acknowledge the partnership approach that the New Zealand Aotearoa contingency is taking. Māori and government in New Zealand have a strong, enduring partnership where we acknowledge that we haven't got everything right. So I'm hearing you, Bradley. Brother, I hear you when you say we're still learning, and so are we in Aotearoa. But we're up for this discussion. And we are enthusiastic and optimistic that we are able to achieve great things, because this is the right time for this discussion. Nō reira, a tēnei te mihi ki a tātou rā. Kia ora.
I'm just going to sing the song.
Te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi Māori e tātou e. Peter, did you want to translate?
Okay, right. The words in that waiata, or that song, the key words are aroha, which is all about relationships, unity, and working together. Whakapono is faith and humility, and rangi Māori is goodwill, good tidings to all as we work together. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Peter.
Kia ora.
thank you very much. And apologies for mispronouncing your name, Pita. I have worked with many Inuit in northern Quebec and in Nunavut named Pita, spelled the same way. So it's my working with the Inuit that influenced the pronunciation. As those of us who work for the Government of Canada know, co-development and working with our partners on the development of policy and processes is our façon de faire, is the way we live and breathe public policy. So it's very encouraging to see both government, and that you mentioned it, Tracy, working hand in hand with Indigenous leadership to get this agreement started and off the ground. And the next person I'll introduce was integral to that, and he was saying it's amazing we're at this stage because he held out his hands. He said, this used to just be a tiny little baby before. So Thomas Hayden from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade of New Zealand. He's the Manager of Trade Policy Engagement Unit at the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and the co-chair of the IPETCA interim body. He serves as New Zealand's chief negotiator on IPETCA. Prior to that, he served in a number of roles as negotiators across New Zealand's free trade agreements, as well as serving as deputy permanent representative to the WTO in Geneva and chargé d'affaires in Baghdad. He also served in the United Nations in Khartoum and Jakarta. Over to you, Thomas.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Firstly, I just want to say it's humbling to be here. When I think back to the early days of IPETCA and the early days of partnership with Pita and Tracy, our co-chairs, to be where we are now is significant. I also obviously want to acknowledge the Tangata Whenua, the people of the land of Canada, as well as Canadian officials. Again, to acknowledge Pita and Tracy, who were the absolute champions in the IPETCA process, and worked to ensure that we were able to get there, and also holding the Crown accountable throughout the process. I also want to acknowledge Māori, who were a critical part of the process, who are not here with us today. That includes critical figures like Maui Solomon, Tanya Te Whenua, and Professor Jane Kelsey, who were really critical to the work and helping New Zealand through this process. It's also auspicious, obviously, given that it's been National Indigenous Day in Ottawa yesterday, but also auspicious in the sense that for New Zealand, we will be celebrating our first public holiday of Matariki, which marks the beginning of the new year in the Māori calendar. So I think from that perspective, to have officials as well as people of the land from both of our economies, as well as from Chinese Taipei, it means it's incredible from a New Zealand perspective to be here and to be able to celebrate this. I won't go into a lot of detail. We know that IPETCA was a historic achievement. I think Wayne summarized it, as well as Tracy, extremely well, what we were managed to secure. In terms of substance, what we have with the IPETCA is not simply a symbolic arrangement. It is a detailed, very specific, which not only sets out substantive provisions, including with respect to the protection of traditional knowledge, defining what we mean by Indigenous trade and investment, trying to move away the sort of classical Western colonial definitions, but also importantly situates the IPETCA in the context of the international recognized rights of Indigenous peoples under the UNDRIP. And that's critically important, telling that story and providing that context, because it serves as the lens in which we will implement the IPETCA. Now, I'm going to keep this incredibly short because I think it's more important that we have an exchange and you don't hear from bureaucrats. It's more important to hear from Indigenous peoples. But with that context in mind, I do want to point out the salient feature of the IPETCA, and Tracy and Wayne both highlighted it well. That is the IPETCA Partnership Council. This is a great achievement, what we've done so far. But what we have to focus on now is ensuring that we get the governing framework right. The IPETCA Partnership Council is not a governmental body or simply a governmental institutional body. It is a joint partnership body in which government officials and Indigenous representatives will make decisions together, not in a back room with officials. So the key message that I think from my side is that we have to get this piece of the puzzle right. We have to focus our time and energy ensuring we have the right governing framework behind it, one that is simple, effective, but also ensures that we are able to welcome other economies. And no economy is the same. New Zealand is very different to Canada. Canada is different to Chinese Taipei. So we're not a monolith, as we know. So it's an important contextual piece, but again, I want to emphasize the critically important piece of IPETCA is the process, it's the governing. And again, the substantive achievement is great, but the process of how we got here was also significant. New Zealand was driven very much by our Trade for All strategy that was agreed by the Labour government over the last couple of years. It's been a significant driver of pushing for inclusive trade policies, and particularly working in partnership with our Treaty of Waitangi partners. That's not consultation. Māori aren't stakeholders, they're partners. There's a very important distinction. So partnership means working side by side, co-designing and co-delivering where it's possible, and it's not always possible. The Crown and Māori have not had it's not a completely rosy picture, as we all know. There's a colonial past, and we don't get everything right. So we're working through it, but the process of the IPETCA last year in forming a partnership group with Māori was a start of a journey to help ensuring that we're bedding in partnership. And we have a unique opportunity now with the Te Regi Tukupu, which is the New Zealand domestic framework for Crown and Māori cooperation to deliver a successful co-chairing of the interim body, but ensuring that there is a unified view. And it won't be smooth, it won't be easy, but we're committed. We have Pita Tepene and Tracy Hopapa who are committed to making sure this happens, but also committed to challenging us when we need to be challenged, which is critically important. And I would say during the IPETCA process, that helped ensure that the quality of the IPETCA was, and it pushed us to think in ways that we didn't think before. So it's an evolutionary process, partnership, but it's one that we're committed to, and it's going to be one that's going to be critical for the success, not just for New Zealand, but for the interim body to work effectively. Each economy has its own processes and standards, but there has to be joint decision-making and partnership from every economy. And I certainly know Canada is committed to it, Chinese Taipei and Australia, and we look forward to moving on this journey. The journey starts. We've got essentially 1 year to set up the Partnership Council. Once the Partnership Council is set up, then we will begin to see the substantive fruits of the work that we've all done. So thank you all very much. We look forward to working with you, and we have hard work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. So Thomas talked about the birth and the governance of the agreement. Sarah talked about the tools that the Government of Canada puts in place and the mechanisms to foster business. But I would like to turn to Tracy and Tilo now to get your impressions of what does it take if the table is well set and the tools and programs and mechanisms to get an entrepreneur or a business ready to export or to increase their export potential. So going from a good framework and a foundation of the pieces being in place and well governed to actually allowing or facilitating the process of export for an entrepreneur. Tracy?
Thanks, Chris. I think we had a great case study before with Natalie, and she talked about some of the challenges of the supply and value chain, especially made more interesting with COVID. I think in New Zealand, a good deal of our Māori economy are small to medium-sized or micro small to medium-sized entities. And so the challenges are the same as here in Canada in terms of access to finance, early stage investment, and the idea of being able to establish routes to market and market access. I suppose the most important thing is to understand that you have first things right, and I know I'm talking business 101 here, but it is most important. The idea of being able to scale up through the opportunity for integration or business groups makes good sense and works well here at home in New Zealand. And so those were some quick top of the mind things, Chris. But Telo, how about you at home?
Back in Taiwan, I think 90% of indigenous people's businesses, those all small business. And for exporting or importing right now, I think we are a little bit behind. But I think we are ready. And once we have the business council, and CIP is going to have a business council meeting. They try to organize next month. So once the business council set up, I believe we pretty much ready, and we are happy to learn from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and I think we have a lot of opportunity here, and we will learn, and we work hard, and the CIP and also works very hard. So I think in the near future, you will have a Taiwan indigenous people's products in your country.
I hope so. Yeah. If I might, Chris. We've talked about IPETCA, which is important, but we also have bilateral agreements and arrangements New Zealand does with Australia and also with Taiwan, and we're in the process of finalising an Indigenous cooperation agreement with Canada. And so those give us the opportunity to fast track business and economic development, which is great, alongside of the more global opportunities that the APEC economies provide us.
Excellent. And Sarah or Thomas, did you have comments on what you've observed of getting Canadian and New Zealand businesses ready or to that next stage of export?
I think I'm sorry, please. I think we completely agree with what Tracy just said. I'm not on the business end of the government's work, but we do work closely with NZTE and other Māori representative organizations with a strong commercial interest. And there is in New Zealand a vibrant, strong Māori economy. A lot of micro to medium to small enterprises that what we hope is the IPETCA will help. Particularly the cooperation mechanisms around capacity building will be a driver to help better prepare some of these small to medium enterprises to get into market, particularly on the international facing export side. But there are a great deal of exporters now that we can be proud of. The Māori economy is strong, but we've got an opportunity here, and the IPETCA will help bolster that.
Yeah, and I would just add, absolutely. I think we have to be listening, right, to our we call them clients in the Trade Commissioner Service, but to our companies, to our entrepreneurs, our Indigenous exporters, and understanding what the challenges are. And as Tracy and Natalie and Bradley spoke of, some of those challenges are certainly well known. Access to financing, access to networks, networks, mentors, and well, there's certainly supply chain and labor issues, and lots of other sort of macroeconomic challenges that are out there that are sort of faced by all SMEs right now, but maybe particularly acute in certain communities. But there are also some really great strengths that that we have been seeing with some of the Indigenous exporters that we've been working with. Amazing in agri-food, in construction industry, in professional and technical services. Some great success stories in a number of these sectors in particular, and then also through some pretty amazing channels like e-commerce, or through social media channels, like different platforms for accessing global markets. So, you know, I think those are things that we can really capitalize on too, and help and support the folks in their growth journey and in their export journey.
Thanks, and certainly from our perspective at ISC, one of the things that we have seen during the pandemic, one of the lousy silver linings of the pandemic, is that ability to pivot, to be online, to look at different markets. I'm wondering, if we had this conversation in 5 years, what are the kind of things that you would like to see in Taiwan and New Zealand as to where we would be, not just with the agreement, but in terms of what your domestic Indigenous entrepreneur export market looked like? Tilo?
After five years, I like to see New Zealand, Australia, Canadian Indigenous people are traveling in Taiwan and buying stuff, and I like to see when I visit Canada or Australia, I see a lot of Taiwanese indigenous people there. They have their own new business all around the world. That's what I like to see in the future.
Great, thank you. Tracy, vision for 5 years?
This is a great question, Chris, and to use Bradley's point, we could talk about this all afternoon, but keeping it short into 2 points, my friend. Firstly, my hope and heartfelt wish is that we will have more Indigenous APEC economies signed up. Second, I would like us to start now thinking about how we might collaborate our investment finances and social entrepreneur opportunities across the largely primary industry asset base that Indigenous peoples have. So Bradley used my relations, my family in Lake Taupo Forest Trust. New Zealand has forestry, dairy, red meat, the plethora of ag industries, but also ag tech and agri-services, which I think we could get smarter as Indigenous and First Nations people to connect up. So we have that global network, and we have the buying and purchasing and influence that the sheer numbers, scale and reach provide for us. So just a small thing. We'll get that tidied up after we've sorted IPETCA.
Yeah, two very interesting answers with very high levels of ambition, so very, very impressive. Sarah, did you, what from a government perspective or next phase of agreements, what would you like to see?
Sure. Well, I hope that we see a very good, robust work plan from this group, and I think that'll be really great in terms of giving us some guideposts as well and some things to shoot for. But also, you know what I think Dawn mentioned, kind of those reestablishing some of those traditional trade routes. I think that would be great to see. We want to help do that and see more Indigenous businesses just participating globally or able to participate globally and fully, because frankly that you know it helps all of us, right? At the end of the day, you know, having more people participating in the economy and in the international and global markets is kind of good for everyone. So I'd like to see much greater numbers of participation, and you know, also in terms of thinking about the financing aspect of it, because I know that's a really important key to help get people launched on their journey, as Natalie said as well. You know, and Dawn's organization can't do it all. So there, there have been some investments made in Indigenous Growth Fund through the Business Development Bank of Canada, for example. I just saw, I think last week, that private sector investment has now joined that. So starting to see that attract in more private capital as well. I think that's really exciting. So, and creating more and more pathways to grow people's businesses is just, that's what I'd like to see in 5 years.
Great, thanks. Thomas, last word to you, since we're out of time.
Just very briefly, I mean, firstly, I think, it's also important to understand what IPETCA is and it's not. It's not a market access document. It's not going to magically unlock markets. But what it can do is increase, through the cooperation activities, the readiness of Indigenous businesses to enter the export market. It will contribute. We just have to keep that frame of reference in mind when we're talking about success. We're not going to see a 200, 300, 400% increase in exports as a result of IPETCA, but what we will see, hopefully, is a structural change that the IPETCA contributes to, which is meaningful. Particularly on some of the areas that both Sarah and Tracy identified. Around some of those key challenges and barriers. And those challenges and barriers are explicitly referenced in the IPETCA. And I think what I would hope to see in the next 5 years, as Tracy also suggested, is that we're going beyond just Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Chinese Taipei, that we're looking at other economies in the APEC region. There were a number of economies who were interested in the IPETCA process, but we just weren't ready. So we're hoping to bring them in. And then just expanding the richness of what we're trying to achieve. And again, every economy is different. There are a number of economies in the APEC region who have substantial Indigenous populations. There are challenging relationships between governments and Indigenous people, and there are large disparities. Now, let's be clear, there's disparities in every one of our economies, including Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Chinese Taipei. And we have to acknowledge that, and IPETCA does. But a number of these disparities are significant in other markets. So that's where we will hopefully see gains as well. When we get other economies joining on board, the longer-term potential structural reform contributions that IPETCA makes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm afraid we're out of time. So thank you, Thomas, Tracy, Thilo, and Sarah. Very, very interesting. And coming out of the pandemic, this is just a very good news and happy economic development story after a couple of years of really tough slogging. Alors, merci beaucoup. Merci à tout le monde. Thank you very much, Pat.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure to moderate. Thanks. There will be, yes, thank you. I mean, reminded, please, there will be coffee and refreshments, I believe, in the lobby, so to feel free to circulate and socialize out there now.
So thank you very much for that presentation. In conclusion, today we heard 4 great achievements and opportunities. Inclusion in the development, the administration of IPETCA, in the IPETCA Partnership Council, and the APEC Caucus on Indigenous Trade and Investment. 2, respect for Indigenous worldview, culture, and way of life. 3, environmental concerns are part of Indigenous business in IPETCA. And 4, the realization of international Indigenous trade opportunities, which are numerous. There are 22 areas of cooperation in the IPETCA for potential Indigenous trade and business activities that could be implemented. So the central goal here is to identify and remove barriers for Indigenous participation in international trade. So in short, the key to success for IPETCA is empowerment of Indigenous peoples as equal partners, giving us the freedom to apply the spirit and intent of the document in a manner that protects Indigenous cultures and our ecosystems, while allowing for Indigenous international trade opportunities. This is the promise of IPETCA and the hope. So in closing, on behalf of the host, the Government of Canada, and its ministerial representatives here today, I would like to thank all the moderators, the panelists, and you, the audience, for attending both here and online. Tomorrow, the live broadcast of the formal IPETCA endorsement ceremony will get underway at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we broadcast on YouTube. So just look up IPETCA again for tomorrow. I invite you all to join us here live online. At that time, back here again in the Great Hall of the Museum of History. I'm Wayne Gardens-Williams, your Master of Ceremonies, officially closing the Indigenous Trade Symposium, and we look forward to seeing you here tomorrow at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. Good afternoon.